questions. Now, what I'd like to just start with, if you look at the title on the screen, it doesn't have the word communicative in it, but I would like to show you through this presentation that when we are promoting implicit learning, which is the learning that the learner is not thinking about, we actually are building communicative competence in all the skills. Because when we communicate, it is usually in a spontaneous situation, not in a situation in a classroom where we have time to think and ponder and imagine rules in our head. It's what we actually have acquired. So implicit learning and implicit knowledge is what we have available in our minds to use spontaneously at any point in the learning process. So let me continue then with no further ado. What I'd like to indicate, of course, is that I do have some objectives. In other words, what we will do together. I actually have about 15 different activities included in this workshop slideshow, and I hope we have time for you to participate in all of them. If not, the instructions are there, and we'll see how many we can do during this time. And of course, I'm assuming we will take a break at about 10:30 so people can get coffee or whatever they need to continue.
Yes.
You can see also that I really hope that by the end of this virtual workshop that you'll be able to understand and use some of these activities and see why they are valuable in the learning process. So we're going to start with the first activity. It won't take very long, but I'm actually going to put you into random groups, random breakout rooms. And in those rooms, what you'll find is a big Google slide. And there are groups of 6 slides in different colors. So, group 1, breakout room 1, you'll go to the first set of slides, breakout room 2 to the second color, and so on. And in each group, there are the same 6 questions, and they're just basically to get us all thinking about this topic for today, which is, what is language fluency, and to think about our own practices. So there is a question on each of the slide in your group, and you just type in, an answer and go to the next slide, and then read what other people have written on those slides. When you're finished with your group, you will be able to read the slides in other groups. So this could take about, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. We won't be able to necessarily answer every question, but the purpose is to get us all thinking together on the topic for today. So what I'm going to do is, whoops, that's not what I'm going to do. I am going to give you the link. Hang on. I need to actually get out of this just for a sec. I'm going to copy that link. No, that's not doing it. Hang on. I'm going to copy that link and put it into the chat box because you don't have access to that yet. So then we will open up the chat. And here is the link to a Google Doc. Hopefully you can all get there. Okay, and now I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. And get my cursor back to my screen. Where have we got more? Still be about 10 people in each group. Or maybe 4 to 5, however many are here.
أستاذة هدى، تسمعيني أستاذة هدى؟ هبعتك على غرفة 5. أستاذة هدى، أنا ما عم بسمعك. أستاذة منى،
مع حضرتك.
أهلا وسهلا. وأستاذة عين، كيف حضرتك؟
أهلا بيكي، الحمد لله.
أخباركم؟ هي شاركتنا باللينك لأستاذة دورين. خليني أشوف، ما عاد فيني أشوف المين شات أنا. أنا حضرتكم دخلتوا الآن. أهلا أستاذ محمد عمار. أم خليني أشوف اللينك وأبعت لكم إياه. ثواني. تمام. لينك. أنا هحط لكم إياه بالشات، قدرتوا تشوفوا الشات؟ أستاذة عين، أستاذ
لازم أكسب.
أنا عم تسمعوني؟ فيكم
أنا سامعة حضرتك،
يعني فيكم
بس
انتوا حتشتغلوا. أنا حطيت لكم اللينك، رجعت على الشات وتفتحوها، بتفتح معكم باوربوينت، وطلبت الأستاذة دورين تختاروا سلايدز وتجاوبوا على السؤال.
تمام. هو لسه ما فتحش معايا، بس لحظة واحدة. ممكن
yeah. تختاروا سلايد من السلايدات في الأسئلة. في what does fluency mean? How does your curriculum prompt fluency is listening?
It says you need access.
Do you need access? عم أقول لك.
It says that, yeah.
خليني أشوف.
Request access or switch to an account, but I think, yeah. I need to send yes.
اطلبي access. اطلبي access.
Yeah, I just send it, yeah.
طيب يلا هعطيكم الاكسس انا. share. مشي الحال؟
Yes.
اوكي، شكرا. طيب يلا افتحوا واختاروا one slide عشان تشتغلوا عليه مع بعضكم. مثلا رقم 1 و2 في حدا أخده، ففيكم تختاروا ممكن 3 اللي بدكم إياه. 5 مأخوذ، 6 مأخوذ. نحن يمكن غرفة 4، إذا بدكم تاخدوا ال4 كمان بصير. How does your curriculum prompt fluency in reading? So فيكم تفتحوا من عندكم وتبلشوا تكتبوا حضرتكم. طبعا فيكم إذا بدكم تحكوا مع بعض بين ما أنتوا عم بتجاوبوا يعني. أستاذة منى، أستاذ محمد عمار، فيكم يعني تعملوا الميكروفون شغال، لأنه إحنا هون بغرفة صغيرة، فيكم تحكوا يعني لا تتركوا
بس كنت
الميكروفون
بقول
مسكر.
كنت بشوف، ما كانش عندي اكسس، بعدين هي جابت جاب الاكسس يعني.
يا بعثت
خلاص.
لكم أنا الأكسس يا أهلا وسهلا أستاذة ليلى معنا.
أهلا أستاذة خالد، السلام عليكم، مرحبا جميعا.
بلشتوا اخترتوا أي سلايد؟ إذا بدنا ناخده مع رقم الغرفة، نحن رقم غرفتنا 4، فإذا بدكم تبلشوا تكتبوا على السلايد. السؤال هو How does your curriculum prompt fluency in reading؟ أو أنا بجوز شارك.
So I believe it doesn't work to open the slides, but anyway, we can discuss that. Room 4, the participant of room 4. Do you like to discuss?
لحظة بجوز أنا خليني أبعث لكم لينك تاني، لأنه أنا شاركتكم بواحد كوبي، مشان هيك طلب خليني أعطيكم واحد تاني. عفوا، ما بعرف، مش المفروض أنتم يكون عندكم. أرجع أشارككم في واحد مرة ثانية. استخدموا الآخر واحد اللي بعته لو سمحتوا.
Yeah, that's better.
الأول كان بده permission من عندي. كنتوا بتحبوا تحكوا، بتحبوا تكتبوا، بس يعني
I think so. إنه يعني discussion هتكون أسهل من الكتابة.
لا، بوث، ممكن واحد يحكي يكتب، بس ممكن
the other one
يعني بس تفتحي الشاشة عندك، فيك يعني تحكي وانت عم تكتبي او عندك فكرة.
True.
ما في مشكلة.
Okay.
يعني تشوز إذا السلايد الأربعة.
first
في
question.
حدا أكثر على السلايد. السلايد رقم 4. The question is how does حنتركه، خلصت الغرفة. How does curriculum prompt fluency in reading؟
أهلا وسهلا، welcome back.
All right. We'll carry on then. Hopefully you can still see the screen.
We do.
Is everybody back?
Yeah.
Okay. I did that activity because as I could see, even though not everybody had a chance to write things, I could see that, in fact, we don't all have exactly the same idea of what fluency is. And I'm hoping that we will, you might say, get together on what we are thinking of as fluency today, because there's only one meaning, you might say, of fluency, or one aspect of fluency that I'm actually going to be talking about today. So what we find is that in the basic problem of language acquisition, we have this dilemma. We know in our first language development that almost everything we learned, other than, you might say, the less frequent features of the language, we learned implicitly through language use, just naturally with our families and our environment. Vocabulary, even if we talk about it in school, it doesn't account for nearly the volume that we actually learn simply without paying attention to it, but actually just by trying to get things done with language. So it seems as though what we do in the first language then changes radically with the second language. And we know from second language acquisition research that, of course, there are some differences, especially if we start learning as adults. However, recent research focusing on more what we would call emergentist views of how the mind works actually show us that a great amount, maybe the largest amount of language learning still has to happen implicitly. And yet our language teaching industry for more than 100 years tends to only focus on explicit knowledge, explicit teaching. So how can we, you might say, shift the balance here? Because as you know, if you've tried to learn other languages as adults, and most of my students as well, some of them have had 10, 12 years of studying English before they come to the United States. And when they get here, they are still barely communicative. So what is the problem, right? If you've spent all that time, why is it not becoming communicative? And I would like to say that, in fact, it's because not enough has been done to support implicit learning. And one of the ways to do that is through focusing on fluency, by the meaning that I will get to here shortly. So classroom instruction focuses on this declarative knowledge. So again, it's important. You cannot get to extremely high levels of acquisition in a second language as an adult unless you do some, actual intentional study. But the volume of time we spend on that doesn't add up to the volume that we need to spend on the implicit learning. Whoops. Okay, wrong one. So, going the wrong way, sorry. So how are we going to turn or do more in the classroom that will get that implicit learning developing? One of the ways that this new understanding or this emergentist view of language acquisition can be described is as statistical learning. In other words, kind of like artificial intelligence, which we know now is becoming a very real phenomenon, and even you might say competing possibly with the human mind, is that it has to do with patterns, pattern recognition. Our brain is a pattern-seeking instrument. I will let you read these yourself, and we won't spend much time here, but basically we are hunters and gatherers in our actual use of language. When we're in real context where language is used for meaningful purposes, our minds are actively seeking the patterns among everything in the language. And I love the first statement here is that we are looking for things that are similar and different, and how they vary and co-vary, and then how things that co-vary. In other words, there's so much variation. We couldn't possibly begin to teach that in a classroom for any foreign language. So statistical learning, which is implicit learning, takes place without conscious attention or awareness. So why is it so important? Well, it's important because if we do only explicit teaching, we have to be sure that we are only teaching things that can actually be learned explicitly. And not everything in a language can be learned explicitly. Sometimes there are things we can explain easily. That doesn't mean that they are learned easily. Practically every book on learning English starts with whatever methodology you choose, but it focuses on the present tense in some way. The truth is the present tense is acquired quite late in English language acquisition. And so even though we can talk about it easily, it doesn't mean that it is easy to learn. So let's take a look here at implicit and explicit memory, because after all, if we have implicit learning, it goes somewhere in our brains. And what we know now is that memory is not just one phenomenon, one location in the brain. There are actually different locations for different kinds of memory. And implicit memory is very deep in the back of our brains. And as we know, that is what you might say is deep and almost instinctual, deeply known, retained for a long time. Whereas explicit memory is what we draw up more in the frontal cortex, and we can think about it and, manipulate it and work on it. So what we want to develop to be communicative, fluently communicative, is more of what's in the implicit memory. And what do we need for that? We need to build implicit memory. The language that's coming into the brain has to be familiar. It can't be on topics that we've never heard about. It has to be related, you might say, to the experiences and knowledge base of the learners. Priming means it needs to be done, like there has to be a lot of it. And there is some kind of, procedural, it becomes, either repetitive or I need to use it quite often. So what are the requirements for that? Minimal conscious attention to learning. Now that sounds like the opposite of most classrooms, right? So what can we do in the classroom that takes the attention off explicit learning? Massive amounts of language and producing and comprehending language for different purposes. So those are, you might say, the mechanisms that can provide the familiarity, priming, and skill building, skill learning that we need for implicit. And of course, the whole point of this workshop is to say that for me, I have found that if we focus on a certain element of fluency, it actually provides, you might say, ways in which we can actively engage in the classroom, but actually focus on implicit learning, which means we're not paying attention to learning. So it seems like it's, at odds with each other, but in fact, they fit together. So I noticed in some of the comments that were written in the first activity that many people put the idea of fluency as this sort of general competency and proficiency to speak, easily, comfortably, clearly, or read or write or all of the skills, but in this very sort of highly proficient way. And very often when we say, oh, someone is fluent in Arabic, we kind of think of them as being extremely proficient, achieving, you might say, native-like, competence. But that is not the meaning I am talking about at all. I'm talking about the ability to use language at any level of proficiency, but to use it smoothly, easily, readily. In other words, coming out of that deep memory. So you're not thinking about it, it just comes out. So obviously, we often start with a greeting, right? So if I am still really, imagining page 2 in the textbook and trying to think about, how to make the greeting, that is not fluent. But if we practice our greetings enough, the greeting should become fluent. And we do that all the time because that's how we often start our classes. But I'm talking about that kind of activity in all the skills at every level of proficiency, so that there is always a growing body of spontaneously available language. Now, that has nothing to do with complexity or accuracy. And here's where the classroom activity often gets tangled up, because people are so focused on accuracy, right? You cannot get fluency and accuracy together. The goal of language learning is to get to a place in the future where you are not only fluent, but also accurate and also able to use language in complex ways. But there is no way to get to that accuracy from the beginning. So accuracy is an end game, an end goal, but you can have fluency all the way along. And in fact, some would say that you might not ever get to accuracy if you don't develop fluency. After all, if you're not regularly using and producing and comprehending language along the way, how are you ever going to get enough input, opportunity for interaction that will allow your brain to actually figure out all those variations for every situation and develop accuracy? Yes, classroom instruction can definitely help with some things. Some people would suggest we shouldn't focus on classroom instruction on accuracy at all, maybe for like several years, only on communication and doing stuff with language. And then later on, when we actually know, oh, I never did figure out the subjunctive. Okay, now I need a little instruction. But we should never start with the focus on accuracy. And having observed many classes over decades of teaching, I can tell you accuracy still seems to be the goal of most people at every level of instruction. And I'd like to say it shouldn't be. So the fluency that I'm talking about today is actually cognitive fluency. So it's a way in which we are trying to build up the capacity to access implicit knowledge quickly, efficiently, so that we can be communicatively fluent in the 4 skills. You can see from this model, it's fairly sophisticated. What is fluency? Many different levels of fluency. Unfortunately, we often focus on utterance fluency for speaking, accuracy in writing and spelling and handwriting and things like this for the other skills, comprehension questions for listening and reading, which is all accuracy oriented. But I'm talking about, what about our ability to automatically, that's the combination of accuracy and speed. And accuracy means here in understanding, not in form, in understanding, and then making it stable so that you regularly understand it or produce it in a way that it can be understood. And together that creates automaticity, and that leads to spontaneous communicative fluency. So all of the activities that I'm going to talk about today are focused on how can we engage as instructors in the classroom, not just telling students, oh, go out of the classroom and use the language so that you can improve. No, what do we need to do in the classroom? Now, I'm not suggesting at any point that we give up all the other things we do in the classroom. I am suggesting that we create a space, not even a very big space, but we create a space with certain activities to address this issue of fluency from the beginning in all the skills. So I already showed you the requirements for implicit learning. What about the requirements for fluency building? Paul Nation is a big advocate of this a kind of activity, and I have focused a lot of my own work and development on his research and others in that field. So you have to focus on meaning. All right, well, that sounds like minimal conscious attention to learning. We're just focused on meaning, right? We're not talking about the form and when we use it. We just are trying to communicate. Use familiar content. Well, if it's familiar, then we're thinking about meaning. We're not thinking about, language grammar. Repetition. Now, we're not talking here about old-fashioned, oral audio kind of like, thoughtless repetition. We're talking about multiple opportunities to use it and to try to make it, unique and interesting, or don't do it for long periods of time. But repetition is necessary to make things more fluent, right? More automatic in our minds. And the last one, which is, maybe something we often don't think about, is use time constraints. Because as we know, students very often become very attached to, word by word, idea by idea kinds of almost like mental translating, which is very explicit and very, very slow. So sometimes if the content is familiar, if we're not correcting them, for accuracy or expecting complexity, but we give them opportunities to use it multiple times and put a little time pressure on, lo and behold, they find that they can use the language a little faster. And that doesn't just mean speaking. Maybe they can listen a little better. Maybe they can produce a little more writing in a period of time, or they can trust themselves a little more in comprehending something when they're reading. So the typical, I would say, and this is based on my experience of observing classrooms over all these years and also looking at textbooks, the typical language curriculum seems to be organized kind of in this, I would say, imbalanced way. Language focused learning, talking about the structure, examining grammar, learning vocabulary directly, intentionally, explicitly, all of that fits into here. Meaning-focused input, well, of course, we try to do that. I have seen many classes start with that, and it devolves into talking about the structure of every sentence, rather than just focusing on the meaning of the paragraph or the cultural content of it. Meaning-focused output, right? And then fluency, maybe not at all, or maybe just in speaking, right? Preparing for a speech. So you repeat it a number of times so that you can say it more fluently, more quickly, more easily. I'm not saying that any of these things are inappropriate to use in a classroom. It's the balance that's the problem, right? That's the problem. So Nation, again, for many decades already, has been, supporting a more balanced curriculum. And here's where each of us has to think about what do we do in our own classrooms and what do we need to do to adjust.
So there is a question, I'm sorry to
Sure, please,
to
please.
stop here. There's a question that, are we risking a possibility of fossilization if no attention is given to accuracy? And I don't think that you're meaning not to pay attention to accuracy. It's just not to make it defocus. Is that?
Yeah, so
Would you elaborate on this?
fossilization, first of all, is, it's kind of a questionable concept. People, I mean, I know that Krashen really talked about it in the past, or early second language acquisition researchers mentioned it more. Today, basically, we don't talk about it a great deal as long as there is ongoing input. So nobody says, stop at, after chapter 1 and become fluent only in chapter 1. One is continuing to move on, but is paying some attention to the ability to use the language. The problem is that we think that if we use the language incorrectly, it'll get stuck in some way. That is such a long process. So for example, where do we actually see that kind of what we sometimes call is stabilization of a second language system? Okay, someone, for example, we have many immigrants to the United States, and we find someone who English is not the primary language. Perhaps they're in a particular job and they only use English in that job. And within 2 years, they are very communicative for the purposes of that job. But if everywhere else in their life, they're not using English for other purposes, then the language becomes kind of stabilized just in that area that they use it. Whereas if the language continues to come in for multiple purposes, there is absolutely no, stabilization. We don't even like to talk about fossilization. It sounds like it's irreparable. The truth is stabilization, although it might be difficult, if that person in that job has to get a new job, guess what? Their brain will again work to figure out the language needs of that new context. And so suddenly what seems stabilized is no longer stable. It starts to expand again. So students don't learn errors from each other. If you and I were trapped in a closet and we only had each other, we would learn each other's language and that would be the end of it. But we aren't. We're in the modern world. We have access to so much input. So as teachers, we absolutely, as is on this slide, we have to provide lots of meaning-focused input. Not checking them for comprehension and tests, but just actually, what did you learn? What did you find out, right? Wasn't that interesting? And if we always make it too difficult up here, then they can't get it. So in fact, one of the, I think, weaknesses of a lot of language curricula is that we had this expectation of always trying to pull them up to somewhere, where in fact, we need to be working more here, where there's a lot that they already know and not so much that they don't know. This is where, Krashen was a little, and of course we could never test Krashen's model of I+1 because we don't know what I is and we don't know what +1 is. So the point is, if we are always just barely at the edge of our understanding, we aren't going to build fluency with everything else. But if we can be adding to what we already feel quite competent with in understanding, not necessarily accuracy, that constant adding of more meaningful input and opportunities for output, there's no stabilization because there's just more language examples, more statistical learning, more awareness of how, you know, a particular form or, you know, collocations or vocabulary are used. So stabilization only happens if you actually completely cut off and limit the input that you're getting and the output that you need. Otherwise, it will not stay. There's no fossilization. So meaning focused input, very important. But notice what Krashen says about that meaning focused input. Mostly familiar grammar. So it can be new content. It can be interesting for them. We can go on teaching, but it can't always be exponentially more difficult in terms of grammatical structures. And what happens when we have that much meaningful input, we continue to have implicit learning. Meaning focused output, opportunities to talk about, to discuss, to write about what we're learning, right? All of those things, again, if we're focused on things that are familiar, that aren't always at the edge of their knowledge grammatically, we are actually, in fact, building fluency. And you can see in the blue, those are things that we do in the classroom, right? Hopefully. Obviously, a lot of people do not do extensive reading and listening, right? And that is a great source of good, meaningful input that builds implicit learning. And of course, we should have language-focused learning. And this is exactly the place to focus on accuracy, to do some intentional vocabulary work. But look, it's in balance now. It doesn't take over the curriculum. It's only 1/4 of our attention. But I think, and that's explicit, that's the explicit learning. So there's a place for it, especially with adult learners. Children, not so much. But with adult learners, there's a place for explicit. We have minds, we have abstract thinking. We can think about the language as a system. But what about fluency development? I'd like to suggest that in what I've observed over the years, there's almost none of this, except when it comes to practicing for a speech. And this is the part that I want to talk about today. So I'm not going to be talking about those other categories. Language-focused learning, we all know way too much about. Meaning-focused input and output, we have our ideas of that. Sometimes it gets a little too focused on accuracy, but we know more about those. But let's focus today just on the fluency development. So here's what Nation and Waring in their 2020 book on extensive reading, but here they're talking about, you know, what do we mean by fluency development in the curriculum? So it's a practice place, okay? So you know how we talk about sometimes PPP, right? Presentation, practice, and produce. And what happens in many classes, presentation takes up almost all the time. Practice is often, again, with something new all the time. And we almost never get to practice. So what they're talking about is that we really focus on a particular type of practice of things that are already known, not always something new. Notice, not new vocabulary, not new grammar, things that we've already been using. Whoops, go back. There we are. So here are some examples that they suggest about ways in which you can do fluency development in the classroom. Now, we're going to look at some of those, but I've got like 10 more across the skills that we're going to look at. Notice what they talk about. They think about each of these components should be about 25% of your curriculum. Now, you can divide that in different ways. In the last curriculum I worked in, we had a course that was focused on reading and writing. We had a course that was focused on listening and speaking. And they worked primarily on the meaning-focused input, output, and language. And then we had a course that was only fluency development across the 4 skills. Well, that's one way to do it. But you could also, if you're teaching integrated skills, it could simply be, maybe it's 15 minutes in every class. Maybe it's 15 minutes 2 times a week. Maybe it's, you know, if you're only teaching reading, maybe it's, you know, 30 minutes once a week. You have to decide what's your curriculum, How much of that is spent on input that's meaningful, output that's meaningful, language focus, and then where's the fluency activity? Notice though, that this kind of activity, it actually makes students tired. Their brains, their hands, they get tired. You cannot do it for long periods of time. You know, you might be able to talk about some cultural phenomenon for the whole class. You cannot do these activities for a whole class. The students will just kind of put their heads down and go to sleep. So these are really short activities, which is why I believe that they are absolutely easy to work into any curriculum and up the element of fluency building and implicit learning. Okay, here's where we're going to start with our first activity. Are there any questions right now? That's just the principles. Now we're actually going to do activities in each of the areas. So are there any questions right now, or should we just jump right into the first activity?
I don't see any questions so far.
Okay, all right. I hope everybody has a piece of paper handy. So either a piece of paper or a Word doc that you open up on your screen. But I'm going to ask everybody to do a little writing in a few minutes. So writing fluency. Now, I wish I had an equal number of activities for each one of the skills, but I don't. And so far, I only have one activity for writing fluency, but I can tell you from my own research and the experience of other instructors, students actually really like this activity, and it does not add, you know, a bunch of work to the instructor. And in fact, after the first couple of times, it's almost no work at all, except to keep track. So we already know that free writing is good to do before major writing because it helps you to enhance ideas. We're not talking about, you know, giving students time to prepare to write an essay. This is writing separate from that. Okay, so notice we need to choose a topic that is completely within the learner's knowledge and experience. And you can do this from the very beginning. Encourage continuous writing without correction. The students need to keep writing. Don't worry about accuracy. Just keep writing ideas. I once taught a student who literally was 0 in English. So when I asked him to do this, I got a list of words he knew in English, including McDonald's, Burger King, but he just kept writing all the words he knew in English. And that's the beginning, right? So at the beginning, he was already becoming fluent. You know, he had hello, goodbye, you know, he had words. Okay, maybe you don't start on the first day of the first semester of the first level, but very quickly, students have things that they've been working with, and you can ask them to write it on different topics that they know about. As an instructor, you only respond to the meaning. Absolutely no correction of grammar of any sort at all, none. Do it regularly so that they continue to add in new things that they are learning and they continue to practice. Set the same time limit. And the topics cannot get more difficult. You can't start with, you know, music, and then next week, you know, cultural traditions. I mean, they're just so vastly different. They have to be totally sort of equally familiar, easy topics. And the goal is that they will be able to write more and more and more over time. And then your job is to keep track. So here's the activity. I'm going to give you, now in the class, I do this for 10 minutes. They write continuously for 10 minutes. It's always shocking to me how few words some students produce. And they're ready, and my students are like already admitted to university to study in English. And I can't believe how little they can produce in 10 minutes, okay? So don't be surprised by that. Because remember, we're drawing on that implicit knowledge. So you might give them a test and they do very well and all they're explicit. And then you ask them to do something just spontaneous and it goes to almost 0. So we're trying to emphasize activity to build that implicit ability. Normally I do 10 minutes. I'm not going to ask you to write for 10 minutes. In fact, I'm only going to ask you to write for 4 minutes. Okay. But for 4 minutes, I want you to write continuously. And I don't care which language you choose to do it in, okay? So just write continuously for 4 minutes, and I'm going to give you a topic. And I'm going to time you. And when I say stop, everybody stop. And then I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. And this is what I do this with domestic English-speaking students in my composition classes. And this is not about preparing to write essays. Even my students who are, US citizens who may only speak English, some of them produce so little text just spontaneously. That tells you how little opportunity they've had to actually use language spontaneously in writing. They're not fluent. So when it comes to writing essays, they have a really hard time. So it's good for everybody, even in your own language. All right, so if you've got your paper ready, I'm going to ask you, here's the topic, food. All right, food. I usually tell students to think about it for a few minutes or a minute. I give them a minute and then I set my timer, and I'm actually going to set it only for 3 minutes. But I don't want you to stop and think. I don't want you to correct. I want you to keep your pen or your hands on the keyboard continuously for 3 minutes and see how much you can produce on anything about food. On your mark, get set, go.
So Doreen, one time I used to tell my students, even if you get stuck, just continue to write the same words. It's just like before you continue to add more words, just not to stop and think.
Absolutely. And I tell them, you're not producing a story or an essay. If you get stuck on one idea, just start writing about the topic in another way. Food I ate yesterday, food I hate, food I like, special food. I mean, just change topics, just keep producing. Okay, everybody stop writing. Now here's the task. Now, when we do this on computer, it's very easy because the computer tells you how many words there are. Many years ago, of course, my students, especially students that I got at that time from China, they didn't have much experience with computers yet. And so they did it by hand really fast. But then they also had to count up the words. So it took a couple of minutes. But that's really important because what we want to see is development over time. So we keep the same amount of time. So that's the constraint. We focus on something meaningful that's easy for them, right? So it's meaningful. And we don't check for accuracy, only for communication. So the first couple of times, I read them all and I make a little handwritten comment about the content. Oh, that sounds so delicious. Man, I would really love to eat that. Okay, or whatever the topic is. But you know what? After I do that a couple of times, they don't even care whether I respond or not. They are motivated by their own progress. They see the change in how much they produce in 10 minutes. And of course, my job is I try to really motivate them. Like, this is your goal. This is like going to the gym. You know, when you go to the gym, you do the same thing and you just try to do more in the same amount of time. So this is your language, exercise. See if you can produce more in the same amount of time. But I try to keep the topics really level. Well, hang on to that number. I'm going to ask for it in a minute. So here you can see that on the left there, that I keep track of the student scores. Now, I will know who has which score, but I prepare a graph like this, and you'll get a model of it in a second. It's in that packet of materials that you have access to. Basically, it's an easy little, formula set up in Excel, but I do one for the class as a whole. And I never number the students, so they don't know, and I don't put them in alphabetically. So they don't know whose number is whose. They only know their own number. But I keep track of the number. And what happens is that as I keep track, I can see the growth of the class as a whole. Each student can track their own progress. I'm tracking the class progress. I've never had a class that did not develop, even among native speakers of English. I've never had a class that did not develop by at least 50%, many students by 100%. Now, when I ask them, for evaluations later, they just think this is fantastic. Like, well, I can write so much faster. And I asked them in my own research and interview study, it was like, so what? Well, I can take notes faster in my classes now. Yeah, well, okay. Anything else? About 30% of my students in my study said, yeah, when I write faster and more, I get better ideas. Now that, again, notice when we have more language spontaneously available to us, it actually projects us forward in language use rather than struggling for each construction. So here are some topics that I give, right? Each student has their own experience of them. They don't have to come with any special, education. It's life information mostly. And then I ask them. And so I'm going to ask you if you're willing. And again, I will not, sorry, I have to remember that I have to get out of, out of this to copy this. I'm going to put the actual Google Doc sheet, copy that into the chat room. And if you open it up, you will find that there is a form there, and you can actually just 15 of you, not everybody, 15 of you can actually put your score in there, and you'll see what happens. So I have it always set up so that when you go to the, well, for some reason now I'm not being able to open it. I don't know if you were able to open it. But basically, when the students put their numbers in, it automatically starts the graph moving. Right. And so every few classes, or maybe, twice in a month, I'll show them the class graph, and it motivates them, to keep going. Sometimes students actually get in a little competition with each other. I don't necessarily encourage that. But you could turn it into a game, with prizes, and, if you can write more words and, in the same amount of time. So there's different ways that you can work with that. Keeping track is one of the goals of fluency building activity. It helps the students actually see real change, which is profoundly motivating for them. When you know nothing and then you know something, you can see the progress. But when you already know a fair bit, like especially like with high, beginning, low, intermediate, they already know quite a bit. It's harder for them to see progress. And this kind of activity shows them real change, and it is motivating. And that's what they tell me. These are comments from my students. So that's the only activity I use for writing fluency. Right now, I'm teaching a composition course for undergraduate students who are going into the major of psychology. Almost all of them are domestic US students, so English is their first language, but no, it's not their first language. Many of my students have other languages because we are an immigrant country. So in fact, most of my students are multilingual. And I do this at the beginning once a week. I have 2 classes a week, and once a week we do 10 minutes of free writing, and the students comment on it, about like this last comment. It's stress-free, they see change, they get ideas, and I'll tell you, for some of them who start the course, they're so fearful of their writing. They're so afraid of making mistakes. They just, their whole lives have been kind of filled with failure because English maybe was not their primary language, but they went to English language schools, right? So they're terrified of writing. And this is a safe place to actually start to be a communicator through writing. Any comments on writing?
Yeah. So what you are referring to is writing in the classroom, whereas I know
Yes.
that going to or working with teachers of Arabic language, they refer to writing at home. So sending a lot of writing at home. So what is the difference? Can you elaborate on that? I mean, it's very important.
The difference is, and of course my students have to do a lot of writing at home. The difference is you are unable to create the time pressure, control the topics, and gather the data to show them how their fluency is actually changing. So it's not there's no attempt here to suggest this is all we do in writing. This is the fluency additive piece to the class, and it happens in the classroom. All of these are activities to be done in the classroom. Some of them students may choose to continue on their own. I know very few students who will go home, set a timer for 10 minutes, and then really push themselves to write where nobody's paying attention. So this is not to replace the writing that does happen at home. Although I do, in my composition classes, I do have them do other kinds of writing in the classroom, because after all, if that's the hard part, why do we send them home to do the hard part alone? They should do the hard part when we're there so they can get help. But that's not what I'm talking about here. This is just a fluency building activity. There's nothing else in the class that has anything to do with food. We're talking about psychology. So these are completely independent of the rest of whatever else you're doing in your curriculum. Okay, just to build fluency.
There is a question: how do you gauge development as far as language is concerned? Is it quantity based?
For this activity in fluency, it is absolutely quantity. How much language can you get out of your brain in 10 minutes? right? So it's actually a measurement of spontaneous language use, which is why it's so important. You must have a topic that they are guaranteed. If you ask them in their native language to talk about it, they could talk about it for an hour. Right? So it's very important that, one, it's interesting to them and it's meaningful. I made the mistake once. I asked a question that had something to do, when I was developing my list of topics, I had a class that was all from one country. And so I asked a question, something that had to do, with the government or whatever. And it was like, well, that was a stupid question. Nobody had any interest and maybe didn't even have knowledge, right? It absolutely has to be so easy a topic that they are guaranteed to have lots of information on it and can write about it, right? So think about it. Could they easily write lots in their own language? Yes. But it's also why I try to give one word or maybe a very short phrase. Research on prompts in language, in writing development. Asking a question actually limits more advanced speakers. So a plain, simple prompt sort of allows for people to go in any direction of wherever their knowledge is. So if in fact all they know is names of a lot of food in Arabic, well, they can start trying to make little sentences like I like, whatever it is, right? And they've got but you've got a more advanced person who can already talk about, the ingredients or how to make something. So the simpler the prompt within their domain of knowledge, right? Totally easy, familiar content, they can write. Any other questions? Hopefully that answered the questions. All right, we're going to do a few listening activities and then we'll take a break. So research on listening. Now, if you think about listening and reading, but listening in particular, most of what we do with listening in listening classes is we test students. Listen, tell me what you understood. Oh, you're wrong. Oh, you're right. So in fact, listening often is just about practice with content and checking how good your memory is. Now, there are people like David Mendelsohn and others in the past who have long talked about the ways to actually teach listening more broadly for comprehending purposes and all of that. I'm going to focus just on how could we become more proficient listeners by building listening fluency. So again, these are short, not even, some of them are much shorter than 10 minutes. You could spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes in a class. And some of these you could actually eventually have students do at home. But again, I don't recommend that because you can't control for that time constraint, which is what you're trying to use to motivate the increase. So here, obviously, we can't count words, right? Because the product of listening is in the brain. It is comprehension. So we do use different mechanisms, and sometimes it is answering questions. But guess what? If you get 100%, it was like probably listening too slow. We only care about 70% because we're listening for general meaning, right? We're not listening, listen, listen again, listen again, listen again, listen again until I get 100%. We're talking about listen. Try to do it at regular speed, but we can start with slower speed. Okay, we can change the speed or the tempo, and we practice to become better listeners. Part of becoming a better listener is also tolerating ambiguity. You don't have to know the meaning of absolutely every word to understand. The truth is, you do have to know the meaning of almost all the words. So that guessing from context, yeah, research on that tells us pretty much only advanced learners can do guessing from context because they have to know so much to be able to guess. Beginning learners can't really do that. So again, we have to make it really easy content, opportunities to repeat and practice, maybe add some time pressure, and not focus on accuracy. Okay, so we're going to do a number of activities now, and we'll see how that goes. Here are the 5 that I've included in this workshop, and we are going to take a break by 10:30. So if we don't finish all these, it's okay. If we have time later, we can come back to them. Okay, the first one is called quick listening. So in this one, if you have opened up the packet, Lena, can you tell me, did participants get that PDF?
No,
Okay.
no, it will be posted on our website along with with the recording. Unfortunately,
Okay,
yeah, we don't have.
Okay, let me see if I can quickly get that for them. Hang on. There we are. All right, I'm going to go to Google Drive here quickly and open that up. Then I can give you the okay, here we go. Okay, in the chat box, I'm going to give you a link. And I'm going to quickly check to make sure I have shared it with all of you. Nope, hang on, you'll have access in 30 seconds. Okay, you now have access. So you should see a little a piece of paper. It says oceans on it.
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do, so in this activity, a quick listen, and there is in the materials that you can get, there is a link where you can actually get a whole booklet which explains how to do these by Sonia Millett. But what we're going to do is I'm going to play this for you. And let's say in our class, you have been, we've been talking about oceans, maybe we've been reading about it, but a quick listen is, so this should be familiar content. So here it doesn't always have to be just content from your own personal life. Let's say we've been talking about oceans, okay? So the content is already familiar, but I'm not testing you for 100% accuracy here. It's just sort of helping you to listen at the speed that I have chosen for you. So if you're a very beginning group, I can actually use a free program like Audacity, and I can slow the whole audio down 50%. And then I can change it over time as we practice to see if you can get higher and higher. Okay, so the one that you see on, you can just listen to it and see what you would say. But if you notice, there are sentences with missing words, but there are also, if you look at number 5, there are also true false statements. So it's kind of a mixed way of listening. Plus, not everything you listen to is represented here. So it's asking you to listen carefully when information relevant to these, what are they, 11, items appear. And you can do it multiple times. As a student in class, or you can do it once, or you can do it once and have students compare and then do it again. So here's the text, and think about how you
questions, Doreen, are these questions given to the student before the listening or no?
Yes. Yeah, this quick listen, they get this list with, and then this is so easy too. It comes out of reading material that we were using in class. And I wrote these, 11 things in a few minutes, and I made the audio. I just read the text, right? So it's very simple to produce and appropriate for the content of whatever you're doing in the class. But the goal here is that we're not testing, right? We're not testing, did they learn the content? This is listening practice. All right, so listen and see how you would fill it in along the way. Oceans. The water in the oceans is salt water, not fresh water. Almost 75% of Earth is covered by oceans. Ocean ecosystems are very important because ocean plants make about 50% of the world's oxygen. At the coast. The coast is the area of land next to an ocean. At the coast, water moves onto a beach and covers it for part of the day, and then it goes out again because of the tides. Many food chains at the coast start with seaweed that grows on rocks. Like most plants, seaweed uses light to make its food. Small animals that eat seaweed have shells that protect them from predators, sun, and wind when the tide is out. Animals like crabs and birds eat these small shellfish. Coral reefs. Most coral reefs grow near coasts, in tropical places, where the ocean is always warm. Corals are small, soft animals that have a skeleton that's as hard as rock. Many corals grow together. After they die, their skeletons become a coral reef. Many colorful animals like clownfish and anemones live together on a coral reef. Anemones have tentacles that sting animals, so most fish are scared of them. Anemones don't hurt clownfish, so clownfish live near anemone tentacles where they are safe from predators. Clownfish help the anemones because they drop tiny pieces of food that the anemones can eat. All right, so you can see, you can make it more complex, you can make it easier. It's not about, dictation, right? It's not about trying to remember. Dictation often is about accuracy. So it really is, plus they're getting meaningful input. If we've already done the reading and we've already talked about this, it's another opportunity for them to hear. They hear, and their brains are processing accurate language. And we're simply asking them to really sort of focus their listening. And of course, we could do this multiple times. In fact, one of the things that, and we'll see this in another activity, I haven't given examples for every task, is to actually create these and then use Audacity, which is very easy, to do it at several different speeds. And then see how easy it is for them to move up over time, right? You don't have to do it all in the same day, but maybe you do this a couple of times, maybe you do another one a couple of times, and then next week you do them again, you do them faster, okay? And you keep adding to them that way. The other thing is that if you've got a group of teachers using the same curriculum, it would be very easy to help each other to build a whole series of these and put them on a learning management system. And it's great for students to listen to different accents, different voices and styles like that. And with Audacity, you can make them all, fit the same kind of speed ranges. So that's quick listening. Now I'm going to do word grab. So in this one, let me show you, I'm going to give you another document if I can. Let me look at it here. So in word grab, now this one, I modified this entirely for a virtual workshop. If we were together, or if I were doing this in class, I would actually have all of these words or terms put onto small, like little clear vocabulary cards. And then we would listen. And then after listening, the students would get these little cards, and then they would do the task with the cards. So it's actually a nice in-class activity. You can do it in pairs and groups, but we'll try to do it individually like this. So here is, again, another document I will put in the chat box. So when you open it up, well, actually, you shouldn't open it up first. So I'm just giving it to you so you have it there. But without looking at it, I would have the students listen. And then the second activity is, okay, now that you've listened, here are the words. Pick out how many of these words or phrases that you heard. Okay, so you've got the link right now, but close your eyes, don't look at it. And here is the text that I'm going to have you listen to. If I can find my cursor. Okay, there we go.
People change ecosystems. People change ecosystems in different ways. They cut down trees for wood, and they clear grassland to build streets and homes. Without plants to use for homes and food, animals in an ecosystem move away.
Okay, sorry.
Or die. People also pollute ecosystems, and this is dangerous for the plants and animals that live there. In 2010, in the Gulf of Mexico, a giant oil rig broke, and it put lots of oil into the ocean. Oil pollution is dangerous for ocean ecosystems. When people catch animals for food, they change ecosystems too. When fishermen take too many fish from the ocean, they damage ocean food chains. If new animals are brought into an ecosystem, they can kill animals that already live there. For example, when farmers put herds of cows or goats on grassland, these animals eat the grass and wild grassland animals starve. Global warming is the way temperatures on Earth are very slowly becoming warmer. Many scientists say that this is because gases like carbon dioxide from factories, cars, and machines are changing Earth's atmosphere. When temperatures change, this can change ecosystems. For example, when ocean temperatures get too warm, corals slowly die. We should protect ecosystems to keep animals and plants safe, and because ecosystems are important for us. For example, coral reefs contain many different species of animals that will die if we destroy the corals. Rainforest plants give people food, medicines, and oxygen. By protecting ecosystems, we are also protecting ourselves.
Okay, so that was like a minute and a half audio.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Lena.
The thing that the link was the same passage that previously, so it wasn't for what you were saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. Well, it worked for
Well, that's
you.
perfect,
You didn't want
because
us.
I didn't
You
want
didn't.
you. Yeah, so that was perfect. Okay, so this. Oh, well, what you got was the link to the whole document, I believe. Is that right?
If we scroll down, I'm
I think
checking
if you
again.
scroll down, you will find word grab card labels.
No.
Nope. Okay. Yeah.
It's only
All right.
one.
I'm going to share this one.
Ocean.
Really? Okay, hang on.
No
We
problem.
can do it this way. Anyone with the link is an editor. Copy the link. Okay, link copied. Hopefully that's it. Well, that would be perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so now you have it. So basically, you see the way I've written it up. I write it up this way because then I just actually print it right onto labels, and then I put the labels on the cards. Now, the way I presented this was obviously for an advanced group of students, right? Because that was quite fast. I mean, it was me talking, and I talk quite fast. I didn't slow down at all, and it was quite a lot of content. So obviously, this is something that we've been studying already, whatever it is. Now, imagine that this is a beginning group. So you've talked about some particular custom. or, whatever, something even, about a place. You can read it slowly. It can be fewer words, but the goal is listen for meaning. And then, okay, I'm not asking you to be accurate 100%, but in this list are some things that were not in the listening. So it's not just about, all of these were in the listening, so I heard them all. No. Some of these were not in the listening. And of course, some might have happened so quickly you didn't hear them. You just didn't notice. So you can actually do this multiple times, right? And that was only 1 minute and 40 seconds. So imagine if the tape is only the recording is 1 minute. Students, you could do this 3-4 times, and I have them do it once or twice alone. And then after maybe the second time or the third time, then they compare their answers with somebody else. And then we listen again. So you could turn this into 5-7 minutes, enough. No one has to be 100%, but it was practice. It was meaningful. It was repetitive, and it had a time constraint by the length of the audio. The audio is just the length that it is. They don't get any more time. Okay. Any questions on that? I think then we should take a break, even if we can come back to these after.
Great activities and ideas, Dr. Doreen. I don't see any question. Is there any question? Nothing so far. So maybe
Okay.
it's good
All right.
time
So,
to separate.
okay. So you decide how long a break, and I'm good with that.
We'll take 15 minutes break, and then
Sounds
we come-
great.
Great. Okay, I'll see
Okay.
everybody in 15 minutes. Think about any questions during that time while you are drinking coffee or, walking around the house. Then when you come back, we can ask. Thank you. We'll see you in
Sounds
15
great.
minutes.
Are you going to post the timer, Iman?
I will find the timer right now. Yeah, because it's not part of the PowerPoint.
No, it's not in my PowerPoint. I'm
Yeah,
going
but
to
I mean,
I'm
it's
going to
easier.
access those. Okay. Thanks. So we're working on repeated listening. This is, again, something that you can create very easily. And this is really, you might say, again, it's listening practice. It's building up fluency. How quickly, how easily is it for you to hear? You could do it on so many different topics. Again, after you have worked on it. So this is not something you do while you're in your explicit engagement, but later, and then repeated. I have found in the other languages that I have attempted to speak, numbers are just always really difficult. And so this is just an example from numbers. And you can make these audio clips very fast, and you can, put them on your learning management system, and students, if they want to practice, they can go back. But these are things to do in class. So, for example, on that first sheet, what you see is the numbers of 1 to 10. But the recording is those numbers, but in all kinds of random order. And what you basically have to do is write down the numbers as you hear them, or it could be you circle each one as you hear it. There are different ways you can do it. You can compare it with somebody else, and listen again. And of course, I can always change the speed. 3, 8, 1, 10, 3, 7, 4, 9, 6, 2, 10, 4, 7, 2, 8, 1. So you could be checking, so that you see how many times you heard it. And you can see, obviously, this is very, very, low proficiency students. I was saying the numbers slowly, right? And they're just practicing a small set at a time. Now, if I do the next one, this is random numbers. And in English, the numbers in the teens, 14, 15, 16, 17, are often confused with 40, 50, 60, 70. So I've kind of mixed them up, right? So that it's a little more discriminating. And you can practice this as many times until they are hearing them more fluently.
45, 50, 15, 75, 60, 13, 30, 15, 50, 16, 17, 70,
Whoops.
60.
Okay, so I put 17 there. I didn't put it on my list, but you can see how you can do this. You could do days of the week, you can do colors. So it's a way to practice discrete items, which you may have focused on explicitly in the classroom, but they're just building up practice. So the speed of your voice is the time constraint, right? The meaning is that you've already talked about, these are words that they need to use. And then the repetition, of course, is how many times you have them listen to it. Again, you're not correcting, right? This is not about correcting for accuracy. It's about practicing getting more language. As they develop, you could do phrases. They don't have to be individual words. They could be groups of words. They could be, collocations that come together. So the idea is that they are, separate bits of language in a random order, which they then identify through repeated listening. Of course, reading while listening, we know this, research on this, it improves both listening ability and reading ability. I think we won't take the time to do this because the texts are fairly long, so I won't have you do them. However, what happens here is that, again, you can decide how much time in class to give to this. You could also have them do some of this at home. But the idea here, I just want to play the tape for you very briefly. And this one is different than what you have on your handout. The one I have on my PowerPoint, it has to do with ecotourism. But you can see what I've done with the audio. So the first time, the audio is 50% slower in tempo, and I just did this. So if you listen to it just for a moment, it's a little strange, but it's still possible.
From BBC Learning English. To find out more, visit our website.
Okay, it's not perfect, but that's 50% lower. You should do 30%.
From BBC Learning English.
Well, I found that often happens when I do that for my students, and I think the only one that it works is like the 75%. At least
but it's important that you change.
Yeah.
It's too slow. It's too odd. Yeah. But remember, it's important to change tempo, not just speed. So speed, it makes it sound very weird. Pitch makes it sound very weird. So those two, if you say with Audacity, change tempo, they come together, then it's a little more audible. But then, of course, they can listen to it later.
This is a download from BBC Learning English. To find out more, visit our website.
And of course, you can also then speed it up, because even BBC Learning English is relatively slow, so you could speed it up. Now, I chose BBC English also just to point out how important it is that students do listen, and with Arabic, we know that's true as well, listen sometimes to different accents, right? Or even different varieties of, not like linguistically completely different varieties, but slightly different varieties of the same language. So again, you can see the instructions there. We won't go through the whole task.
This is
And then one more thing that I have for listening, it's called narrow listening. This was a lot of fun too. And here you can get your colleagues to work with you. So let's say you've been talking, and this one I'm doing it, I did this one with Thanksgiving. So you're talking about a cultural event, and you've already done, your input and output and language, whatever around it. But now you want to work on listening fluency. Well, I just went to a bunch of my colleagues and I said, what do you like most about Thanksgiving? Tell me in 1 minute. Well, they picked up their phones, hit voice memo, and gave me a little audio, which then I linked here. So then you get a whole bunch of them. So there's a lot of repetitive language because they're all talking on the same topic, but there's different, accents and voices. And here the response is just listen to these for like 10 minutes. Okay, now let's have a discussion about what people think is wonderful about Thanksgiving, or, do a quick write, on what these people thought was fun about it. Again, don't focus on accuracy, just on meaning, what they got, but they're getting a lot of input with repetition because the topic was the same across the speakers, and they're also getting variety. And these are so easy to produce, and you can have, I would not do 3. I mean, I would do 5 or 7 of the same, but I'm just giving you an example of 3 of these. And these were just my friends.
One of the things I like most about Thanksgiving is the cranberry sauce, especially since I learned maybe 20 years ago that there was a difference between the canned cranberry sauce and the real thing, and how easy the real thing was to make. But what I really like about the cranberry Thanksgiving, which is kind of
friends and family,
let me start that one again.
Friends of the family who are.
Hang on, let's start that one over.
One of the things I like most about Thanksgiving, especially since I learned maybe.
All right, now we'll start this one.
My favorite thing about Thanksgiving is just getting together with friends and family to spend time together, and then also sort of the ritual of the Thanksgiving holiday.
So then another friend.
My favorite thing about Thanksgiving is probably coming together as a family without the expectation of buying some kind of gift, and instead really the goal of spending time together, telling stories from our...
My favorite thing about Thanksgiving is just getting together from fuzzy.
Okay, so you can see how they're different stories, but there ends up being quite a bit of repetition, and yet some different coming together, getting together. These are similar things. We can say either one of them, not one is not more correct than another, but the topic is the same. Clearly, people want to be with family, they like the food, that kind of thing. So again, just listening, and then drawing meaning from the listening. So those are the ones that I have then for listening. And again, the students make comments like these. Any comments, questions about fluency for listening?
Doreen, and this is different than, again, this is a kind of practice to get them used to listen to things, which is different than listening to authentic materials and, working with the correct speed and, practicing again.
It is practice, and the focus again is on getting meaning from text. Now, all of those texts were authentic. Well, not the one that were, even if I'm giving the numbers, I'm a native speaker saying those numbers. The people talking about Thanksgiving, it's authentic text.
Yeah, the people talking about Thanksgiving, yes. However, for the numbers, unless it's the numbers, and again, they are listening to our voice, which is they are used to. It's just like to differentiate between the two, and the goals of the two things. So for example, if we bring an ad on TV, and that they are giving us like, call this number for such and such, call this number. And it's again, looking for a meaning. It would be a little bit different than it is like more of content, you know.
Right. So, I mean, again, if you use these texts to draw from the students accurate representations of the language in some kind of, you know, definition, I mean, or very, very specific, you are not using them for fluency. You could take an ad and also use it if you had, you know, listen to it for fluency purposes, like we're going to listen to it at this speed. Oh, now we're going to try and listen to it a little faster. So the thing about, I struggle a bit with the term authentic, because authentic materials are materials that were produced for highly proficient users of a language. And that means that they are, by definition, beyond the reach of beginning learners of a language. So I like to think about authentic uses of language. So are we using the language authentically? In other words, when we listen for meaning, that's an authentic use of language. So whether I produce the text at a slightly slower speed so that they could authentically get meaning from it, then whether I produce that text or the television or some company produced the text, the students are doing things that are authentic with language. So, you know, I mean, we can talk about authentic meaning,
authentic, yeah,
created for native speakers, but you know what I mean? I mean, many times what is created for a native speaker is beyond the reach of a beginner. And so then they can't use it authentically. Then we have to pull it apart and focus on accuracy. So I'm not talking about all the other ways that we use listening text in a class.
Yeah, just to differentiate. Yeah, it's
yeah. Right. In other words, you know,
not
you
to
can't have your
discuss
beginners.
right now.
You know, yeah.
Well,
so that's the way I look at it. We're trying to use language authentically, but you're absolutely right. There are some contriving features when we change the timing or we focus on specific language, like the numbers one. But like the repeated listening to the BBC, I mean, they might be speaking a little slower, but those are two native speakers talking to each other about a topic. So it is authentic language in that sense, but it's got the learner in mind so that they can authentically listen. So that's how I kind of deal with but again, this is like, you know, a quarter or less of your curriculum. I'm not making any comments about the other things we do in the curriculum.
Thank you.
So speaking fluency, this is probably the one area that, in fact, many people have ideas of what they might do to increase speaking fluency. But I'm going to suggest a few, and again, that meet these criteria of a little bit of a time constraint, very easy, familiar, and only for the purposes of meaning making. So, of course, there is research on this as well. Notice that in each of these, we're actually trying to increase the learner's ability to process, you might say, the smaller components of language so that it frees up the working memory to apply, you might say, other cognitive skills, metacognition. So in other words, if I can't listen to a text because I can't even separate the words from each other, I cannot do any authentic listening. But if I can more quickly parse, you might say, the bottom up, you know, words, phrases, even pronunciation, sounds, if I can do those, we call them bottom up skills, more fluently, more quickly, more automatically, it frees up my working memory to apply other ideas and knowledge to understanding the text. So where we talk about, let's say, listening to authentic tasks for meaningful input, you know, we need to think about the context. We need to think about, you know, all the background information. We do lots of things around listening to help us be better listeners. But if we are not separating words from each other, all of that is unavailable to us because our working memory is totally tied up with the little bits and pieces. So most of these activities are trying to work on what we call bottom-up skills, parsing of sounds, symbols, words, phrases, small syntactic components, so that we free up the working memory to apply those other skills when we go back to doing, you might say, the other kinds of listening activities we would do in the classroom. So here are some that I use in developing fluency for speaking. 432, you can look it up online. You can, we cannot do it. It has to be done face-to-face. Believe me, I've tried to do it in Zoom classes. It's just a nightmare. So it really doesn't work, and it takes way too much time. But it's a fabulous activity for building speaking fluency with a focus on meaning, and you can do it at absolutely every level. I, in fact, do it sometimes with my graduate students, you know, doctoral students, to build up fluency on a topic that we've been discussing. So you pair up the students in like two parallel lines. They're facing each other in pairs. And one group, you give them a question, you give them a word, you give them whatever it is within their linguistic competence. And then you give them an amount of time. 432 refers to minutes. Believe me, my language learners can never talk about anything for 4 minutes. So basically the point is 432 means start with an amount and then do it 3 times and reduce the amount of time. So the first time I usually give a minute. I say, okay, here's the topic. And only one side of the students is talking. And they try to talk for a minute, and then I stop. And then I say, okay, now you have to say everything you just said, but you only get 45 seconds. So they already have thought about what they want to say. Okay. Now they know what they want to say. Now they have to try to say it in 45 seconds. They almost always can do it. And then I say, okay, now try to do it in 30 seconds. Okay, many times they laugh and they can't do it. They can't talk that fast yet. But over time, they basically build up the capacity to use what they know in the language more quickly. So it's a very successful activity. And then the other side gets their turn. Each time you change partners, so you move the line, which means you're not saying the same thing to the same person 3 times, because that would be ridiculously boring and not meaningful. You change partners. So you're saying the same information, trying to do it a little faster, but you've got a new partner. So they're actually interested, right? Because they haven't heard you before. And then you change partners again. And now you've got someone who's also interested, and you're trying to say it faster. And then the other group does it. So the instructions are there. You can look it up on YouTube. There are examples of it. We cannot do it together, but honestly, it is a fantastic discussion. And over time, not only are the students speaking more words in the amount of time, the research that I've had even some of my graduate students do in master's theses, they've actually found that the quality, not just the quantity, the quality of the production actually, and I'm talking like over like weeks of doing this on different topics, you know, like 10 minutes this day, 10 minutes another day, 10 minutes another day, like that. Over time, the quality improves in terms of pausing structure. So words per minute is not the only thing for fluency. It also has to be where you make pauses, how many pauses, that kind of thing. So there's actually a quality growth by just having so much opportunity to push yourself, once you know what you want to say, to push yourself to say it a little bit faster. It actually over time improves the quality. So we can't do it together, unfortunately. We can do this together, and this is probably something you may have done before, and it is a fluency activity. So one shouldn't do it for long. One shouldn't expect 100% accuracy. But if you go in your handout, this one is, it should look like this. Right? And so basically, this is a case where we try to say it all together, not just following me. I mean, we can start that way the first time, and I can be really slow, right? But what I want is for all of us to say it together at the same time, and like a choir. And then I divide the class into 2 parts. So on one side of the class says the first one, the other side of the class says, on the other side, right? So that it becomes, a response. Then I can put them in small groups and they can do it. And then I can change the tempo by simply, clapping for how quickly they need to say these things. And of course, it can be any kind of content, right? Any kind of content. But it has to be content that they are, in other words, they already know this vocabulary. It's not like this is vocabulary they've never seen before or never talked about, okay? So the content has to be familiar, and then we can do it repetitively. So again, it takes a bit of time to get a whole group of people to be speaking in unison. But the importance of it is that not only you're actually then also developing intonational patterns, right? So you can get pausing, you can get intonational patterns, and getting them together, and then you try to divide them, and then you try to get them to do it faster and faster until it is native-like in speed. But we're not looking, we're not correcting, we're not grading, right? We're controlling the time, pressure, and there's repetition, but by changing up the groupings, it remains somewhat meaningful because they're not doing it all together and hiding behind the whole class. I don't think we'll do it as a whole group because with 60 people on Zoom or 40 or whatever it is, it might be a little difficult to do that. Now, I am going to ask you to try to do this because this is quite unusual, although there has been some research on this as well. Sorry. So I'm basically going to pretend that you're all learning Polish. I don't know if anybody knows Polish, but that's one of the languages that I, try to use. Okay, other than English. So this one as well, again, it's just for speech fluency. The language has to be language we've already heard about. So the language here, I mean, I'll tell you what it means. It basically means, what's your name? On the A column, and the response is, my name is Doreen. And then on the left side, it says, how are you? And I say, fine. And you? And they say, oh, I'm fine, thank you. Where are you from? And then I say, I'm from Canada. And you? And they say, oh, I'm from Poland. And then the last one is, I'm happy to meet you. So let's say we've already done a lot of introduction language in class, meeting each other, that kind of thing. So now we're working on how to get that a little bit faster, a little bit smoother, good intonation. So you're actually going to be my echo. This is not choral. Choral, we're all together. This is just echo. Echo might be useful before choral. So when I say it, you're going to be my echo. So you don't have to care what anybody else says. You just try to follow me. And the reason I'm using Polish is because it's probably unfamiliar to most of you. And so it'll be a little struggle. I'm going to say it very slowly. Don't wait till I'm finished. As soon as I start talking, you start copying me. Okay, see if you can do it. I'm going to start really slowly. Jak masz na imię? Okay, so you should be right along with me, right? I'll do it again. Jak masz na imię? Nazivem Shem Doreen. Shesh Yak Shelmash Dobja Ate Uminye Dobja Huya Skont Pohojish Jestem Zganade Ate Ja jestem Polski. Miło się poznać. Okay, pretty good. So you're trying to do it just like my echo. Of course, we would do this a number of times and your echoing is going to get better and better and better. In class, students are typically listening to me. I've recorded myself. They're listening on headsets, so they're not actually hearing the other students and they're just talking quietly to themselves to try to copy along with me. And we can just do it, several times. They can then, try to have the conversation with each other if they want. And the goal again is that they're getting intonational patterns. They're building up comfort with these phrases that are so common. If we can't do our greetings and get to know each other quickly, we can never get into the conversation for more natural input. So these kinds of early fluency activities at the very beginning of language learning are really important. And of course, you can choose which language you put in there. Oh, now this one, you wouldn't be able to do right at the very beginning, perhaps, but as soon as you have worked with some text, in the class, and that it doesn't have to be the same text that you've used, but it has to be text that the students have some familiarity, at least with the vocabulary. The content could be, newer or less new to them, but it cannot be completely, beyond their capacity. So it should be easy, right? It should be easy, even if they don't know all the content. Grammatically easy, linguistically easy, lexically easy, right? And this is one where, so if you look in your handout, I put in two texts. One is called Rosa Parks, and the other one is Bad Day. And they are of different lengths. It's just to show you can do it with content. It might be content relevant to your course. It could be fiction, a story, but remember, it has to be easy. So when you see a text like The Bad Day, which was created sort of at an A2 level, you might not want to use it at A2 level. You might want to use it at B2 level, because it actually has to be easy as a fluency building activity. You could use it as, an input activity, for A2 students, or for B2, for A2 students. But for listening fluency, you would use it with more advanced students so that it's totally within their linguistic capacity.
Excuse me, do you mean bad secrets or bad day? Because I see bad secrets.
Oh, sorry, Bad Day. Is it called Bad Day?
Bad secrets.
No, it's called Bad Secrets. Bad Secrets.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Bad Secrets was considered to be an A2 level reading, but for listening fluency, I would use it for B2 students. Okay, because to do listening fluency, the texts that you use have to really be easy if we're working on fluency. So the goal here is actually, it has a reading benefit as well, but it's both, it's speaking and reading together, you might say. So it's a very interesting task. And if I put you all in pairs, you could go and do it now. So what happens is that each student has the same text. Student 1 starts reading. Student 2 is keeping time on their phone. And as soon as you hit 15 seconds, they say stop. You make a little mark on the text. How far did you get in 15 seconds? Then you start again at the beginning. And now the timing is for 30 seconds. Okay, stop. You go back to the beginning, and now the time is 45 seconds. Stop. At 45 seconds, you change roles, and student B now is the speaker, and they start where you stopped at 45 seconds. That's where they start. And they do 15 seconds, and then 30 seconds, and then 45 seconds. And then it reverses again. And you can have the class do this in pairs for as much time as you want. Sometimes I do this for maybe 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. They might not finish the story. Then we just pick it up the next time we do this. Now, what the students will notice, and I'm going to ask you to do it, I am going to put you in breakout rooms in pairs in a minute here. And someone keeps track first, and someone reads first, and then it switches. What you notice is that when you reread the same portion, each time you go faster. So you might do 15 seconds, but 30 seconds is going to be more than double because you read that first 15 faster the second time. And when you go to 45 seconds, you've now read what you did 30 seconds, all of that goes faster. So what you notice is that when you mark the paper, where you mark 15, 30, and 45, each time is a little bit bigger than just a repetition of that first 15. I hope that makes sense. So if you're willing to try it, we can put you in breakout rooms for no more than 5 minutes and see if you want to try it. What do you think, Lena? Should we try it, or should we just go on to the reading activities? I know we're going to be out of time soon.
Yeah, I mean, we have to leave at least less than minutes for any open questions.
Right.
I think the idea is clear. I mean, thumb up for everyone if they are okay with that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, I agree. As long as the idea is clear, we don't have to practice it now. I agree. Let's move on. The last thing I do with speeches, and this is kind of an awareness activity for building fluency, because fluency is not just speed. It also is smoothness, right? Which has a lot to do with pausing structure. If you pause in the wrong places, it's very difficult for the listener. So this actually is a way to raise students' awareness to that structure. I have them do spontaneous speeches. Again, super easy topic. They pick up their phones. They do it all together in the classroom, but if they hold the phone close, nobody else can hear, and I can hear the audio very clearly. And I tell them, you've got 2 minutes. You've got 1 minute to think, no writing. I give them simple topics, kind of like the writing. So maybe I say food. And now they have 1 minute to think about it. And then I say, go. The whole class starts, because nobody wants to go first. The whole class starts, and they all talk about food for 2 minutes. And I do this several times during the semester. For homework, they have to transcribe their speech. And they have to transcribe it with all the pauses. So this is what it looks like. Listen, this is like what a student speech sounds like.
To prepare my first day in USF, I practice to introduce myself to.
Okay, so you can see that kind of thing. Pauses are normal. We're not looking for speech without pauses. It's how long they are, how noisy they are, and also where they are. That's important. So after this, they go home.
To prepare
let me give you an example. Oh, I thought I had an example of what. Oh, here's an example. So it's a different speech, but here's an example of a student transcript of just 1 minute. So they turned on the tape and they had 12 seconds of silence. That's not fluent, right? Somebody asks you a question, you got to start talking. You can't wait 12 seconds to think about it. And then they went for 2 seconds. Now, I don't ask them to write down anything less than 2 seconds. And in fact, if they use Audacity, they can actually, you can look at Audacity and see and count how long the seconds are. So I teach my students how to use Audacity. It helps them. And notice the X's. The students are required to try to figure out which of those pauses are really bad. Which of those pauses actually are a problem for meaning. Long pauses and pauses in the wrong places. So this is what they do. Now, what's really interesting is that I've done research on this, action-based research in the classroom, and I've actually discovered that by this awareness building and doing these spontaneous speeches several times, several things happen. One, we do get more words per minute, which fine, but way more important is we get fewer bad pauses. So I'm not trying to eliminate pauses. We all have pauses in oral production, right? This isn't a formal speech presentation. This is just normal talking. So pauses are fine, but it's the bad pauses. And over time, most students show a statistically significant improvement in the number of bad pauses. And that has to do with practice and awareness. Now, the other speech fluency activities obviously contribute to this kind of improvement in the spontaneous speeches. But here they actually see a change in their pausing structure, which is quite useful. I like the student who said, I can talk more emotionally now in English. Basically, from confidence, they can also, show their feelings through their speech. All right, reading fluency. Again, we know some of these these sometimes do show up in a textbook, but maybe not in the same way. And I'm not talking here about extensive reading, which does build fluency. Extensive reading, unless it is super easy, like C2 students reading A1 material. I'm talking like that easy. And in fact, research shows even very advanced learners of a foreign language gain more fluency and comprehension by reading large amounts of very easy material than even material that's just a little bit easier. Why? They simply read more. They get more text into their head. Why is that important? More text, more ability for the brain to do its natural work of figuring out how things work in the language. That's the statistical learning. That's the implicit learning. That's what we cannot teach. Not enough time, not possible to do in explicit contexts. So getting more text into the brain is always a benefit. So even very advanced reading, super easy, gain more than if they're even reading sort of easy. We always think that they have to be reading just a little bit beyond their capacity. No, that's where Krashen was wrong. Okay, that does not build implicit knowledge, right? Those are things we can do when we're doing our explicit teaching, but not for fluency building. Lots of research on this in terms of reading. Rapid word recognition, you can make these up. So in your handout, you should be able to see this. I believe it is maybe number 8. Do you see it in the materials? It's a list of words.
Yes, and they are like close.
It's like a close, right?
Right.
So
yeah,
in fact, if you go to the very end of that document, what you'll find is a reading fluency checklist. So it's a way for the students to keep track of their changes over time. So for example, on that very last page, you'll see the first one is rapid word recognition. you have to figure out by trial and error a little bit, like what would be a speed where most students would get at least half of that page, you know, in that amount of time. Then you keep that time steady. And every time you do this, you hope that they will get a few more, you know, a few more lines in the same amount of time. I often do these like 4 different ones at one time. Doing more is too difficult. Like you only do one sheet one time. So you have to have, let's say, several of them. But doing more than a few at a time, the students, their eyes are exhausted. They can't do it. In fact, sometimes I'll do one sheet of rapid word recognition with like a speed reading in between, and then a rapid word and a speed reading. And that's enough for one time. And that might take, you know, 10 minutes total and be done. So like a page like this, basically, you know, with my students, you know, you might say 20 seconds. And you give them time for 20 seconds to try to circle the exact same words. And then on their checklist, they write down how many did they get? They got 20, or they got, well, they didn't get 20 seconds, and maybe they only got, you know, 15 of the 25. And it has to be how many they got accurately in this case. So, but the time pressure is there. This is less about, you know, it has to be easy, right? It has to be vocabulary that they've already, you know, within their competency. It can't be, you know, entirely new words they've never seen before. But the idea is here to actually make your eyes move faster. Students tend to read word by word by word by word and translate. This does not, one, build fluency or comprehension, right? Because there's not enough in the working memory. So the goal here in the first step with this is make your eyes move faster and sort of trust them to pick out the word, right? You have to have rapid word recognition. That's the beginning of fluency for reading. Rereading type 1. So here you should have the text called rereading type 1. And this is one, again, where you do it in class because you give them a certain amount of time. So you have to choose texts, and you in your mind, let's say, you know, for university purposes in English, we want our students to be reading, you know, somewhere around 250 words per minute, or they're going to really, really, really struggle. But many of my students who have already been admitted to university based on their test scores, they may be reading less than 100 words per minute. Okay, so with this activity, I want them to try to build their reading speed, and what can do that because the more times you read it, the more familiar you become with it. So in this one, I just have them read it once and check their time. Write down the first time. Read it again. How fast did you read it the second time? And they're reading silently, reading silently. Now, the third and the fourth time, they're going to read orally to a partner. Now that's going to slow them down, but it is also going to, by doing it twice, build some fluency. Like they'll do it faster the second time. And now they have also heard it twice. Then they read it the fifth time through, they read it again silently and check their time. The times always go up. Okay, I mean, between the first, the second, and the fifth, when they're doing it alone, the fluency goes up. That's enough for that text. You might do 2 texts in a class. And again, you're trying to find texts at about the same number of words and the same level of easiness. I'm not going to say same level of difficulty because they're all supposed to be easy. So here is often where you can find, you know, materials even from previous, like lower levels of proficiency, right? From just sources basically, you know, that would be considered too easy for that level in terms of a textbook material. How to respond? Well, you know what? You don't have to. You don't have to take anything out of this if you want to, because if all the students are using the same texts, well, you can easily then have a conversation. You can ask them to write something about it. You can have, you know, that's fine. if it's focused on meaning. That's not part of the fluency activity, right? And we're not looking for accuracy. So you don't have to have them do anything with it. You can just have them read it those times in that way and mark their scores, and then do it again next week with a few texts, and then maybe the following week with a few texts. And again, here's where working together with a couple of teachers is really helpful, because you can build up a library of these materials quite quickly. In English, we actually have like Paul Nation and other people have put together fluency like books that are filled with texts at like proficiency levels, all about the same length, right? Now, they also all come with comprehension questions, and I'm going to show you how I use those, but you can just use the texts for this kind of rereading. Next activity is another kind of rereading, but here the rereading comes with actual questions. The goal, though, is not that you get 100% right necessarily, 70% fine, because that's sort of average, everyday, normal listening, not for learning, not for testing, is about 70% comprehension. So here I choose, because I know the length of the text, I might try to push them. So let's say I know that they're all reading around, 100 words, in 2 minutes or 100 words per minute, but I want to push them. So I know the number of words of the text, and I'm going to give them an amount of time that pushes them to read it at a faster rate than 100 words per minute. I make them read it while I time it, and then I let them try to answer the questions and see how well they do. Sometimes they completely surprise themselves that they got, 70% right, even while they felt that they hadn't stopped and looked at every word, okay? And I will do a number of these different texts, or we might do the same text a couple of times to see if we can push them faster. Let's say they do the text and like most of the students hardly get any questions right. Well, then we'll just do it again. We'll do it a third time, kind of thing. But you don't want to do the same text too many times. Move on to another text of a similar sort. And again, this might be a 10-minute activity once a week. The next one is truly, you might say, speed reading. So pushing students to read, but here they have to push themselves. So it's a little bit like the fluency writing activity where I give them, I tell them 10 minutes and they have to push themselves to write more. Here, they read it. They don't look at the text. Try to answer questions. All right. Then they look at another text. Write their time, don't look at the text, try to answer the questions. And in that way, I look and I see how fast they're reading. I know what that means in terms of words per minute because the texts are all about the same length. And here I actually look at, like if they're getting 100%, they're reading too slowly. If they're getting 0% of the questions right, they're reading too fast. So their goal is to be about 70% accurate. Now, this is very unusual for students who have been trained mostly to be 100% accurate, but that causes them to read too slowly. So the goal, again, is to push them towards that goal you have for their level of proficiency, right? Beginners would be great if they got to, maybe, 80 words per minute, but university supposed to be ready students need to be closer to 250. So you choose the texts well within their linguistic competence, right? Really easy text, familiar grammar, vocabulary, put on some time pressure and allow them to sometimes do some repetition, in different ways to build up fluency. These don't have to be the topics that you're talking about in other aspects of your class, but they do have to be familiar to the students. Paced reading, you'll see an example in the text. Here's where I actually give them the feeling of reading at a criterion level. So the text is there, it's marked in the margins with particular mark that I put in, and then I know how many words that is. So let's say the first bunch of words is 100. If I want them to experience reading at 200 words per minute, basically at 30 seconds, I'm going to make a noise and they have to jump to the next dot, right? The next dot, whatever it is, regardless of whether they're finished reading or not. So I'm pushing them to, you might say, jump ahead in the text to keep up with the speed of reading that I am trying to move them towards. Obviously, it can't be way beyond their ability. But by doing that, they are starting to get the feeling of what it means to move your eyes faster across the text. Then I give them questions and see how they do. Again, sometimes they're completely surprised at how well they're doing with going quickly through the text. So these are all methods that you can use to, and again, 10, 15 minutes in a class, maybe only a couple of texts, maybe only once a week. In my reading curriculum, I have all these different ones. So I might do 1 or 2 of them in 1 week and other ones in the next week, and then go back so that the students get a bunch of different types of activities, but the total amount of time focused on fluency is never more than a quarter of the curriculum. And I would say, because of the pressures of textbooks and, prescribed curricula, very often it ends up being maybe, 10%. But my encouragement to all of you is that you try to get some fluency activity into your curriculum, because it is a way in which we do build up communicative fluency in all the skills. And much more importantly, in my opinion, we are working at building up and using and strengthening our implicit knowledge, which fundamentally is what we retain the longest and what we have to rely on for spontaneous language use. So what's my role? Well, of course, I have to collect these activities. I've been collecting these activities for years. I started with 1 or 2, and then I find other ones, and I learn about this one, and I look for research on them to see how they're valuable. So I've been collecting these activities. There are 15 in this PowerPoint. And I don't use them all the time, but I keep looking for other ones that will be interesting, but they have to meet the criteria, right? They have to meet those principles for both promoting implicit learning and developing fluency. So my job with the students is to train them and convince them sometimes about why this is important. Students say, oh, can you please correct my writing in my writing fluency? It's like, oh, no. We do that in other writing. This writing is not for that. This writing is just for fluency building. I'm not going to give you corrections on your writing. Students think they need to get 100% and feedback on everything. No. This is just to build fluency. I have to be a model for students. I write with them, right? So when we're doing the writing fluency, I'm doing the writing fluency. When they're doing, of course, some of the other ones, I'm controlling various things, but I try to show them that, and I'll do it in my foreign language, right? They're trying to do it in Arabic. I'll try to do it in some other language, okay? Record keeping, really important. Helping them to keep records, but then you checking on them. I can tell when students are getting lazy, their numbers are just flatlined, because students who are trying, their numbers are always going up. I've never had a class where most of the students, their scores in everything just didn't go up and up and up in fluency. I'm not saying accuracy, I'm talking fluency. And then assessor, that's where I look more generally, right? Where I can actually demonstrate to administrators, where I can demonstrate to other instructors, hey, something really good is going on here. So you can become an action researcher in your classroom because you're collecting all kinds of data on these different activities and how their fluency is developing. So I leave you with one question. How are you going to promote implicit learning through fluency building in your classroom next week, next month, next semester, whenever you're in the classroom next. Thank you. Let's have questions if there's still time.
Thank you very much, Doreen. It's really wonderful, and all these techniques and all these activities that it would help us to build the fluency and all skills that we have. We need that. Thank you for explaining. Thank you for the explanation that it's like it's one activity that builds fluency, and then it's along with other activities that they need to do. Wonderful.
Yes, I mean, we can't give up on all the other things. I mean, personally, I have developed classes where I have given up on other things, but that's because I'm in charge. Most of the time we don't have that luxury. You know,
it's a balance. It's always
right. It's a balance. And I have many, you know, instructors tell me, oh no, in my country, I cannot do that. I have to do all these other things. And I kind of say, well, you know, you might have to just be a little bit tiny subversive. I'm sure that you can squeeze in 5 minutes,
exactly,
you know, and start with that. You know, so basically, I think it is something that, and once the students really like these activities because they see change.
Mm-hmm.
And when they see change, it's motivating to them.
Absolutely. So now we see it's very important for us again to get evidence that this a wonderful session. So please provide us, you know, complete the survey that you have.
I just put the link in the chat. So please go and fill it out. It's very important. Thank you so much, Dr. Doreen. It is amazing, filled with the beautiful, plenty of ideas to enhance fluency in reading, writing, the 4th skill. And we really thank you. I don't see any one would to ask a final question, any concern, any elaboration what Dr. Doreen has just explained. If anyone has anything, everyone is saying thank you.
Yes, and
and I'm very happy. You know, I don't hesitate to email me directly. I'm very happy to answer questions specifically, or you know, to send materials if they didn't come through clearly. You know, from every session I've done, I always get a few, you know, follow-up inquiries, and those are tremendously interesting for me. So like I said, I love talking with teachers about teaching, so don't hesitate.
Thank you very much. And with that, actually, we have we know that this is our last session officially for this year for this for the SCATC. However, we have good news for everybody. We are partnering with Dr. Layla Bahr al-Ulum, and I'm gonna give her the chance. I hope that she is here, still here, to make an announcement for our next event next week that we are gonna talk about. Okay, can I see Dr. Layla? I don't see her. It's because of last year, a lot of requests about the summer programs. We have a lot of summer programs where you can use all these techniques. You have more time, you have you know, the time with your students, and a lot of activities that to engage your students with that, to build their language. So we have that next week. At what time, Lena? I'm just trying to see.
Yes, it is the same time. It's 1 hour actually, and during the weekdays, Wednesday.
In the evening.
No, in the no. It's not in the evening. It is next Saturday. It is next Saturday, Jama. It's next Saturday. It is changed to June 24th. June 24th from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. I'm gonna try right now.
Lena, sorry, we cannot access the document you sent. It doesn't exist.
Oh, really? Can you share it on the link, please?
هي اللينك.
Well, I copied the link and I sent it.
طيب ابعت لي انا
Share it with
إذا ما عم
everyone.
تقدر.
هادية
good
بس
now.
خليك. Yeah, it worked.
It's good now. Thank you.
All right.
Just
All
I'm
right,
trying
so
to get
yeah.
it seems like Layla is
She's not there.
having difficulties
Can we
with
stop
her.
sharing so we can put the flyer, Iman?
Yeah, you have the
Oh,
flyer.
yes.
Can you please share the flyer? Thank you very much, and thank you,
And
Hadia.
we
You
don't
are
want
our
to
savior.
take the time of Dr. Doreen. We need to thank her so much and appreciate having you, and hopefully we'll have you more next year with one of our sessions, and we keep visiting. And of course, as she said, please, if you have anything, any question, you can directly ask her. We will have this recording on our website along with her slides to benefit everyone who attended and everyone who did not.
Okay.
Thank you so
That's great.
much.
Thank you very much. It was really
Thank you.
a pleasure to be with you. I wish we could do it in person, but
Maybe.
this is a great
Maybe.
alternative. I'd
Since you
love to
are in
travel to
Southern
all the
California.
countries.
No, but I mean, we always have our in-person conference in Southern
More
California, and
sessions
now
next
you are close to us, so hopefully we will
I'd
have
be
it
happy.
more interactive. Yeah, thank you so much.
Exactly. I prefer more
It's a pleasure.
interaction.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.
I wish you all
And
well. Bye bye.
thank you. Bye. Okay, Hadia, can you post it or Hadia is showing the attachment?
Yes, يلا.
Yeah.
And the evaluation, is it all accessible, please, for everyone, just to make sure, Hadia?
The
Because
evaluation
I open it, it's open, but there is some people they are sending that doesn't work.
يس عفوا دكتورة ما عم يفتح وبيقول لي انه not found يعني المسج اللي عطاني اياه حطيته على الشات.
تمام. So there is something, it's important to have evaluation, guys.
Okay, here is
إذا عم يطلب منك إني بجوز عم تستعملي إيميل تبع الجامعة أو شيء، إذا عم يطلب منك يعطيكي
الإيميل
access ابعتي لي
الخاص.
هادية لازم يكون يفتح للجميع بغض النظر.
ما دخل جامعة أو لا.
يا هلا أنا عندي 6 عملوا، مفروض يكون هو لكل حدا، يعني ما فيه restriction، بس هن حسب إذا ما إنهم عاملين sign in على الجيميل بجوز ما يخليهم، ما بعرف. بس
لا ما بالضرورة، هذا مفتوح عادة.
مفروض يكون مفتوح.
مفروض مفتوح للجميع.
مفتوح يا هادية.
ابعتوا لنا يا مرة ثانية بليز.
أستاذة إيمان حطيت
عرضته.
شكرا.
فهذا الأسبوع القادم إن شاء الله يوم 24 شهر لمدة ساعة فقط، من الساعة 10 للساعة 11. إن شاء الله يكون أفكار جميلة ورائعة من الدكتورة ليلى والأستاذة غادة والأستاذة نور ترازي. إن شاء الله يعني هذا فقط موجز، وسيكون إن شاء الله لن نأخذ كل الأفكار نعطيها الآن أو نروح تشويق، عامل التشويق. إن شاء الله ستكونون معنا وتتعرفون على أفكار جديدة إن شاء الله.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
شكرا جزيلا على كل ما قدمتم، كان يعني تقديم رائع اليوم ما شاء الله. من فضلكم ممكن تبعتوا لينك الوركشوب الجاي؟
إن شاء الله إن شاء الله. المفروض لحظة بس أنا لطالع لكم إياه، أعطيكم إياه لحظة بس دقيقة. أنا عم حاول، أنا كنت والله مأمنة بالدكتورة ليلى أنه هي اللي تعرض، لأنه بصراحة هي كان يعني شغلها
لو سمحتي يا أستاذة لبنى، هل قصدك الرابط لهذا الوركشوب أم الوركشوب القادم سيقدم في الأسبوع القادم؟ ما السؤال؟ أي لينك؟ لأن هناك يعني في بعض
لينا رابط التسجيل تبع الأسبوع القادم تقصد؟
طيب ألن نرسله بالإيميل للجميع؟
نعم سنرسله، بإمكاننا أن نرسله بالإيميل للجميع.
ونحن نحطه على الويب سايت إن شاء الله، حطيت لكم الويب سايت تبعنا.
تمام عظيم. بس هلا الجميع الفورم اشتغل معاهم.
عفوا سلام
إيه.
سلام. I put the form for the
لا بس نحن ما بدنا.
شكرا أستاذة ناشدة. يا الإيفالويشن اللي حطتها الأستاذة ناشدة شغالة، واللي أنا حطيتها شغالة.
عظيم عظيم.
يمكن اللي حطتها الأستاذة لينا مو شغالة، فانتبهوا أي وحدة عم تكبسوا.
اشتغلت مع الأستاذة هادية I submit. شكرا جزيلا كثير.
شكرا لك. شكرا.
الأسبوع القادم يا رب يعطيك.
إن شاء الله إن شاء الله. أهلا وسهلا.
والأستاذة ناشدة حطت لكم تبع النكست تايم.
شكرا أستاذة ناشدة. شكرا. شكرا جزيلا. وهناك أيضا إذا أحدكم عنده بيعرف برنامج لتعليم اللغة العربية وبحاجة لأساتذة، نحن يأتينا يعني بعض من الأساتذة الحضور الآن معنا ولديهم الرغبة أو عندهم الوقت يعني التدريس في مثل هذه البرامج. فإذا بتخبرونا بنكون نحن مثل مين وفق راسين على أو برنامج وأستاذ، فبيجينا الأجر من الجهتين إن شاء الله.
التدريس عفوا أونلاين ولا in person؟
هي لا، الرغبة بعتقد ما في مانع للجهتين، المهم أو إلا ممكن تصححني صاحبة الطلب، لكن المهم إذا عندكم مدرسة وبحاجة إلى مدرس أو مدرسة ف بس أعطونا خبر وبنعلن عليه نحن. أونلاين.
الشاغر يعني حيكون أونلاين. أنا
إيه.
إذا هيك أبعت ماي ريزومي أنا بقدر أدرس أونلاين.
لا في 2 بدهم، يعني هلا 2 بدهم تدريس أونلاين. لا بدنا برامج تكون يعني بحاجة لمدرسين. هلا اللي بعرف في University of Maryland عندها طلبات الآن فاتحة للطلبات للتدريس بس مو للآن، وليس للصيف، للفصل القادم.
طب إذا ممكن إذا في هيك شواغر تبعتوا لنا بالإيميل، أو إذا بنقدر نعمل أكسس أي الجامعات أو أي المدارس اللي في رغبة أونلاين أو إن بيرسون، إحنا بنقدر نطلع عليهم بعد إذنكم.
إن شاء الله بنحاول نضع هذه خاصية على الويب سايت عنا لنشوف إن شاء الله بإذن الله تعالى.
سلامتك يا هادية، بس لو تسكري الميكروفون يا سلامتك علي قوية.
أستاذة إيمان،
نعم.
بالنسبة University of Maryland is it full-time job for next year؟
والله لا بعتقد، بس يعني كمان أونلاين، بس صفوف عندهم صفوف، فعدد الصفوف الشاغرة لا أعرف والله.
فيك تبعتي لي رابط تعملي معروف على الإيميل؟
وأنا كمان.
طيب خليني أنا أرجع أشوفه، لأنه أنا بصراحة كنت يعني عم بعمل ترشيح لإحدى المدرسات يلي هي كانت عم تسألني عنه، وقلت لها أنه هو برنامج جيد، فبشوف برجع لحتى أشوف إذا كان موجود. بس أنا بعدين قرأت أنه عاملين اللي ما عم يجيكم أنتم من قطر فاونديشن، بيجي K through 12 النيوزليتر تبعهم موجود، كل الشواغر موجودة هناك.
أنا ما تجيني من القطر فاونديشن، رغم أني يعني عملت ممبرشيب. أعتقد مرة كان في وركشوب وأعطونا يعني استماع، عمرتها ويعني I submitted، لكن ولا شيء يصلني منه.
I think بدي سبسكرايب بالويب سايت تبعهم مشان تيجي النيوزليتر على طول عندك، وتنتبه على أي إيميل استخدمته. يعني ممكن استخدمت إيميل مدرسة بالزمانات وما عاد عم بتشوفه يعني. so maybe
شكرا أستاذة هادية، شكرا جزيلا، وتحياتي لأبنائي الأعزاء.
شكرا لك، الله يخليك يا رب. شكرا.
عفوا. شكرا.
رجاء نعبي الاستمارة، لسه في ناس عم تطلع بدون ما تعبي الاستمارة تبع التقويم. شكرا لكم قبل ما تطلعوا لو سمحتوا.
شكرا جزيلا، وإن شاء الله نراكم في اللقاء القادم في الأسبوع القادم.
يومكم
شكرا
سعيد. السلام عليكم.
وأنا أسعد. الحمد لله. الله يخليك. وشكرا لحضوركم دكتور عبد الله دائما ما شاء الله، والدكتور محمد من ماليزيا، ومن صحح بس نفسي أنا من إندونيسيا ولا ماليزيا أيضا سنغافورة.
إخوتي الأساتذة الذكور، أنا أعطيكم إيميل ونبقى على تواصل إن شاء الله. اسمي عادل، أنا من تونس وأدرس في كاليفورنيا. أتشرف بمعرفتكم.
أهلا وسهلا.
شكرا جميعا، يعطيكم
شكرا
الف عافيه.
للجميع. شكرا، الله معكم، مع السلامه.
مع السلامه.
أستاذة نسرين، سألتيني عن موضوع البيرل كلاسز للتسجيل فيهم. أنت حابة ترجعي الأسسمنت مرة ثانية؟
والله كيفك، أنا شو رأيك؟ يعني إنه أنا
والله
حضرت.
هي أنت بتحبي، أنت حضرتي معي، أنا طبعا دائما بجدد وبغير فيه قليلا، لكن إذا أحببتي إنك تسجلي بالبرامج الأخرى كمان لا بأس بها. يعني مع لورا تريل رائع جدا بيكون معها، وأيضا
نعم.
ممكن إنك تسجلي الاثنين، يعني بس حسب طبعا
نعم.
الأشياء المتاحة لك. إذا عندك منح لحتى تدفع لك للتسجيل.
هو حقيقة أنا ما عندي منحة، بس ما بعرف إنه قطر فاونديشن هلا عندهم، أنا أبدا ما أخذت
صحيح.
منهم.
قطر
هلا عندهم.
فاونديشن ممكن تقدمي عندهم $2000 بيعطوك اياهم لخلال السنة كاملة. لا أدري إن كان بيغطوا في الصيف الآن، يعني بيلحقوا إنه يغطوكي في الصيف، لكن كمان عندهم البرنامج. يعني إذا رحتي على الويب سايت تبعهم على قطر فاونديشن، المنحة للمدرسين والمدرسات مبلغها $2000 لحضور أي محاضرات أو برامج تأهيلية أو يعني لأساتذة المدارس.
نعم.
الشيء الذي لا أعرفه بصراحة إنه هل هذا بيعطوه بس للمدارس الحكومية أم المدارس الحكومية والخاصة للأساتذة؟ لكن ربما للاثنين، الله أعلم يعني.
نعم، خير إن شاء الله. أنا حاليا ما عندي منحة، بس يعني I will try إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله. هو مبلغ بسيط، لكن إذا حبيتي تاخدي أكثر من صف معهم، لأنه نحن كل مرة يعني كل 3 أيام بغير البرنامج. عرفتي علي كيف؟
نعم.
ففي عنا 6 برامج.
نعم.
البرنامج التقويم واحد منهم، برنامج الإعداد المناهج الثاني، برنامج التركيز على كيفية إيصال المعلومة باستخدام اللغة المحسن using the target language، وفي هناك واحد building leadership، وفي عندك واحد from input to output من المدخلات إلى المخرجات. وهذا يعني في الصيف وأونلاين لمدة 3 أيام متواصلة عادة أي برنامج. إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله خير. شكرا جزيلا. وبالنسبة للبرنامج اللي راح تقدمي بالسمر، I'm also interested in it. يعني is there any way إنه هو
أي واحد
بالسمر اللي هو
تبع سانتا باربرا؟
نعم تبع الاميرجن كلاس روم.
دول اميرجن. بصراحة أنا بس معزومة مدعوة كتدريس مثل السنة الماضية، فأنت بعتي لهم طبعا مفتوح. ما بدري إذا عندهم المنح. إذا كلمتي نفس الشيء فالوري مثل السنة الماضية، لا أدري إذا عندها هالسنة هي منح ولا لا.
نعم.
لأنه فالوري هلا تركت كمان وصارت مديرة مدرسة بصراحة. فما أدري إذا عندها الشيء هذا، صار لي فترة ما شفت أنا.
يلا
يعني
خير إن شاء الله. شكرا
الله
جزيلا.
يجعلك بخير. الله يخليك. الله يخليك. أهلا وسهلا.
أنا حقيقة كتبت المسج وضل بالي، لأنه مش بالعادة إنه ما جاوبتي.
والله لأني أنا مشغولة جدا جدا مع والدي هنا، فيعني مسافر.